It's Thursday, it's 4:20. That means it's time to start the conversation. THC Live starts now. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to THC Live. I'm Shane Foxman. Thanks for joining us for another Thursday afternoon special. Some of the most important things to get out of the way first, you're watching us live on Facebook. As Nikita likes to say, more on Nikita in a second. As Nikita likes to say, there's a box at the bottom of the screen if you have any questions for us or our guests or comments you want to share throughout the show, feel free. Also, you can always catch us on YouTube as well. We have our own channel there, THC Live Space TV, THC Live Space TV on YouTube. You can watch past episodes as well in different segments, so it's all there for your enjoyment at your schedule. Coming up, before we even get to what's on today's show, as you noticed, Nikita, again, not here. I'm flying solo. Last week we told you she was on a special assignment, maybe doing some research. Well, we found out what Nikita was up to. There's Nikita there, and you notice she's holding her left hand in a way that you might go, is that an engagement ring on her finger? And before you start complaining about what pictures we're using, Nikita sent us these pictures. So that makes it all okay. Nikita got engaged over the last week. Congratulations to Nikita and Keith. Is Nikita back next week? The week after. She's still basking in the glow of her engagement. She'll be back at episode 12, so we'll see her back here on week 12. Meantime, let's get ahead to what's on today's show. Former head pastor Mark Frogley and current pastor Tim Doling from the Sunshine Ridge Baptist Church. They're located in Surrey. They are going to join us live on the couch. We'll talk to them. Do they have concerns from a spiritual or what would it be, theological perspective as we get closer and closer to legalization, July 1st, 2018. Also on the show, Dr. Rob O'Brien. He's the president and director of Valens AgriTech, as well as SUPRA THC Services. He will join us on the couch as well. They do all kinds of scientific research, R&D. In the chance, we had to chat with him just before the show. We talked a little bit about, roadside tests. There's been so much talk and discussion about that and what's going to happen. He had some interesting thoughts, so we'll talk to Dr. O'Brien about that. But first, we've been showing you every week, we take you back in time, a little history in our Growing Pains segment. And this week, finally, for the first time, it's taken 10 weeks, finally light at the end of the tunnel. December of 2003, Canada's Supreme Court says cannabis is basically harmless and prison sentences for simple possession constitute a demonstrably unfit sentence. However, it upholds laws against cannabis because it might harm teens and pregnant women. Can you say cognitive dissonance?
There's just overwhelming and growing scientific and medical evidence about the bad long-term effects of marijuana. Tobacco is a product that does a lot of damage. Marijuana is infinitely worse.
In 2006, the government cuts off funding for the Federal Medical Marijuana Research Program.
This is nuts.
Even so, the tide is turning. In the U.S., by 2005, possession of small amounts of marijuana is decriminalized within Denver city limits. In 2007, lawyer Brian Vicente sues Colorado over a law that allows caregivers to sell marijuana to only 5 patients, thus limiting medical accessibility for his client, Damien Legault. They win. Their victory sparks the Colorado Green Rush. Between 2007 and 2011, hundreds of dispensaries opened, but the industry is unregulated and banks won't touch the owner's money. It's like the Wild West without the cattle rustling.
Hey, gringo.
Recognizing the need for oversight, Vicente and Colorado lawmakers set up a well-regulated marijuana industry. By 2011, all dispensaries must be licensed. Inspections must be made. Every plant, leaf, bud, and stem is tracked. Taxes must be paid. The regulatory structure is called, and pay attention Canada, the Cannabis Best Practices. In November 2012, California and Washington State vote to legalize marijuana. The Americans are on a roll. Then, on August 8, 2013, a political earthquake.
I made an error in my computations. Oh, this could be an historic occasion.
CNN chief medical correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta publicly reverses his position on cannabis.
I've apologized for some of the earlier reporting because I think, we've been terribly and systematically misled in this country for some time, and I did part of that misleading. I think it's irresponsible of the medical community not to offer this as an alternative.
Is marijuana something you would prescribe to your patients?
I think there are certainly situations where not only does it seem to work, it seems to work better than what's already out there.
Republican Senator Rand Paul and Patrick Leahy introduce a bill to end mandatory minimum sentences in federal drug cases.
The ACLU reports that blacks are 4 to 5 times more likely to be convicted for drug possession, although surveys indicate that blacks and whites use drugs at about the same similar rate. The majority of illegal drug users and dealers nationwide are white, but 3/4 of the people in prison for drug offenses are African American or Latino. The injustice of mandatory minimum sentences is impossible to ignore when you hear the stories of the victims.
Some observers call it the beginning of the end of the war on drugs. In April 2014, Health Canada establishes marijuana for medical purposes regulations. Patients must register with and order from licensed producers who are now authorized to produce medical cannabis. In June 2015, Canada's Supreme Court expands the definition of medical cannabis to include any form of the drug, including brownies, teas, or oils. In June 2016, the Task Force on Cannabis Legalization and Regulation is formed. They submit their findings in November, saying the move away from cannabis prohibition is long overdue. The report also recommends ongoing research into cannabis and its effects on human health.
It merely deadens certain nerve inputs to the brain.
Oh, well, any decent blend of scotch will do that.
Legalization of marijuana will be part of the Liberal Party platform. One of the things that we actually have to figure out is what the exact model is going to be right for Canada. And we'll base ourselves on best practices from around the world. My focus is on making it more difficult for young people to access it. And at this point, I don't think that corner stores necessarily are rigorous enough in checking ID to make me comfortable with that as an option.
In April 2017, a bill to legalize cannabis by July 1st, 2018 is introduced to Parliament. It allows use by individuals 18 and over and possession of up to 30 grams. Provinces can further restrict possession, sale, and use. As of November 16th, 2017, cannabis remains a Schedule II drug in Canada and a Schedule I drug in the United States.
Anything else? Oh, yes. Denny Crane.
You really got a sense there as we move closer and closer to legalization. In our business segment coming up a little bit later, you'll see so many of the major companies on both sides of the border jumping in to the cannabis or hopping on the cannabis bandwagon, I guess you might want to say, as we all talk about following the money. There's a lot of money at stake. Our first guests on the show today, a former head pastor at the Sunshine Ridge Baptist Church, Mark Frogley, and Tim Doling, the lead pastor there. Now, gentlemen, thank you for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
July 1st, 2018. Are we worried about that day, or are we not worried about it?
I don't think we're worried about it. We anticipated it. I think anticipated from my perspective in a disappointing way, but we knew it was coming. It's part of where.
Why in a disappointing way?
Well, because I don't think it's going to contribute a lot to society as a whole. It's establishing another liberty, what people want, but I don't see it as really being helpful to a healthy lifestyle.
The same tobacco, alcohol, that exactly. It kind of goes to people's, as you said, liberties, right? Like here, we're telling you maybe it's bad for you, it's not the most healthiest thing, fast food, whatever you want to pick. Exactly. Everyone makes their own choices.
Yep.
Do you share that thought, or you?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we have been dealing with I've been in youth ministry for close to 20 years. This is conversations that I've been having for years now. What is wrong with marijuana? Why shouldn't I use it? And it's always difficult to, try to convince someone of something they don't want to believe anyway. So now making it legal is going to make that step even further.
That's what I was going to say. Your message probably has to change somewhat, because, or maybe not, because it is legal now. It's easy for, you got some kids or younger people in your congregation. They go, well, why are you telling me not to? I can see it. People are buying it every day. What do you say, or what will you say?
Well, the message for us doesn't really change because we live through the principles of what the Bible teaches us, and so one of the important teachings of the Scripture is that when one embraces Christ and seeks to live for Him, that our body is known as a temple, and so He comes to live within us by His Spirit, and as a result, I have to take care of that temple. So what I choose to imbibe, what I choose to allow to enter it, whether it be through food, whether it be through cannabis, whether it be through alcohol, tobacco, illicit sex, whatever it might be, all of those things will desecrate the temple. And so that's the challenge. So I don't think the message really changes for us.
Does it make it harder to make the case, though?
Oh, totally makes, because in some respects, the legalization of marijuana is now just another added thing for the teen looking forward to 18 as a rite of passage, just like alcohol is, legally, at 19, I guess, in the province of British Columbia. So will cannabis be. So they're looking forward to that rite of passage. And so, yeah, it's there, but are the long-term effects going to be helpful?
Is it just the recreational aspects of it, or do you consider, because there seems to be a lot of evidence for the use of medical marijuana in a variety of different things?
Yeah, we were talking about this before the show, just about, I think it's an important distinction to make, recreational versus medical. Now, I am no scientist by any means. That's why I became a pastor. But...
Was the curriculum easier?
Yeah, much. So I can't speak to the medical use.
Right.
In the growing pains, we saw Dr. Gupta talking about how there are, I can't refute that. And so I think the distinction is important. So that we're talking, we're approaching this right now from the recreational use, I believe.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned the Scriptures. Does it say anywhere not to, where do you draw the line that says the connection between cannabis and something in the Scripture that says don't do something? What is that?
Right. Well, I could go a million different ways with that.
Right.
One of the things that really came to my attention this morning as I was kind of getting ready for this was the Westminster Shorter Catechism says that we exist to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So one of the very first things that for me that comes out of that is can I glorify God under the influence of a substance? But the other part of that too is Jesus talked about abundant life. How the thief came to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life abundant. So our source of abundant life is not the next high. The source of abundant life has to be Jesus. Now, as we were talking earlier, we talked about I can't be prescriptive for people who don't agree with me.
Right.
Right. And I'm not going to force my views. My job is to tell people the truth. Now, their job is to decide.
Why do you think, you said you can't glorify God if, say, you were under the influence of marijuana?
Well,
why not? Again, I'm just playing the devil's advocate. I'm trying to get a handle on that.
Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah. Well, I think once you enter into, you start to smoke up, you do marijuana after a while, you enter into a euphoria, right? You're in an altered state. Your mind, you lose control at that point.
Could you make the argument that your mind's, those would say that it opens their mind to other possibilities and breaks down the walls? Again, the lack of a scientific term.
Right.
But there is that argument.
I've heard that, yes.
Yes. You don't buy that.
I haven't experienced it personally.
Right, but you don't buy that.
I can't speak from that context, yeah.
It's
not that I don't buy it, it's more looking at from what, more the theological side of things, that when we lose control of ourselves. Just like, for example, someone consumes too much alcohol, gets in a car, kills somebody, or does something else that handicaps them for life. So the same thing, you take it down the road. When you're out of control, other forces take over, and so you're no longer capable of that glorifying God, that vertical relationship, which we, of course, as Christian pastors, that's our whole focus as we seek to lead our people.
Do you tell, in your years as a youth pastor, obviously kids that are 14, you're telling them not to drink, I would assume. Without religious or not religious, that's a fact. But as they get older and they pass, say, the legal age, where does that kind of work with cannabis?
So the Bible actually directly addresses the use of alcohol. There's a few different things you need to keep in mind. First of all, there's the law of the land. Romans talks about we are subject to the law of the land. And so I would always tell our youth, the first thing is, are you 19? Then this is a non-issue.
Right.
But secondly, it talks about not being mastered by anything. So, is alcohol something that I need to relax at the end of the day? Is alcohol something that I run to for comfort? It talks about not being drunk with wine. It talks about not being in a situation where you're causing others to sin. And so it's a very nuanced conversation around alcohol. Now, when it comes to marijuana, now the Bible doesn't directly address marijuana. It does address being sober-minded. It does address being prepared at any juncture for defending our faith. And it does address, as Mark was talking about, just the whole temple aspect, where the Holy Spirit comes to live in us. Why now would we seek something that we might perceive as better or different, which might be the high?
It's interesting. Are you getting questions from your congregation, from parishioners, or is it a topic of conversation? Or is, again, like I'm thinking that because if you don't use it and never used it, it's one of those laws that doesn't affect you. Like to me, it's like gay marriage, and I have a bad example maybe with you, but like it doesn't affect me, so no one's forcing me to do anything, so I'm all good with it, with that kind of. Have you heard from your congregation at all, or?
I would say for the most part, and Tim can disagree with me perhaps because he's more connected with the youth, but it's really been a non-issue.
Right.
I think they will continue for the most part to have the same values in that direction. I think, but as we get further into it, 5-10 years, as a generation goes through, young people coming up, that's going to become more the challenge, I think, for the church as a whole. And any of the comments we're making, by the way, we're looking at them in the context of the believing community. For those who choose not to participate, we're not there standing in judgment over them.
Right.
You must not. Yeah.
Right. You're not telling everyone what they should do, but
again,
you're saying you're speaking the truth as you see it, or I shouldn't say as you see it, but as you believe it.
Well, because we believe the Bible is authoritative for life and practice for the Christian. If that's the case, then I teach it so, right? And so to the people who come to our church on a Sunday morning, I'm not going to just say, this is my truth, this is what I feel like you should believe. I tell them, this is God's word. Right? And if you're here, we're here in the context of understanding this is God's word. Let's talk about that and how it is prescriptive for our lives, how it is authoritative in everything we do.
We're going to have a question from someone on the audience, but I just want to ask you, it's interesting because you're right, as you said, Mark, the adults in your congregation, this doesn't change anything for them, but it would be the next wave, the youth who, as you say, go, well, it's legal, why wouldn't I at least try it? Like, what's the harm if they're saying I can? Again, at a certain age, 18, 21, whatever it ends up being.
Right. And for the parent of a teen, of course,
right,
or adolescent or teen, in the conversations they're going to have over the next decade or so.
Those are going to be hard ones now, for sure.
Most definitely, yeah.
Well, you'll be hearing a lot of, I am sure they'll be coming to you for guidance for that. Camille?
Well, that's why we hired Tim. So.
Yeah. Well, all your experience with the youth.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah, please, thank you. Thank you, Camille. Okay, this from C-Ray asks, what about communion wine? But you had mentioned alcohol. Well, depends on how you use alcohol.
It depends on the denomination, if you're honest.
Right.
We use grape juice. I don't know why.
Oh really?
But yeah, there are many congregations who use wine. But again, that's addressing the issue of alcohol. So.
And just to respond to that as well, the communion wine now in every church, pretty well, every denomination has an alternative. So there's a sensitivity to, quote, those who may be alcoholic.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
One other one, this was interesting. We kind of touched on it, but this is from Brandon in Calgary. What's wrong with Liberties, who says you lose control under the influence, I guess. But as you guys talked, you're not telling everyone else how to live.
Right.
This is just your
Yeah, see, when you become a Christian, you're accepting a new way of life. You're accepting a new king over your behavior, over your attitudes. And so now my job as a Christian is to live out the way that Jesus has directed me. And in all fairness, it does. The Bible tells me to share my faith, to talk about Jesus with people. And I will. But I'm never going to tell somebody, believe Jesus or die, or I'll kill you,
Right.
The choice has to be individually in the end.
That's what it always comes down to. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in today. Mark Frogley, former head pastor, Sunshine Ridge Baptist Church, and Tim Doling, the lead pastor at the Sunshine Ridge Baptist Church in Surrey, 13 years as a youth pastor. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in. Always find the discussion interesting.
Thank you.
Our
Thanks
privilege.
for your time. Now let's see, as always, let's see what's top of the list on this week's book club. Thanks, guys. We are back. Our thanks again to the pastors for joining us. Does a pair of pastors beat a pair of jacks? I'll have to check my list. Let's take a look at what's making news this week in the world of cannabis. And one thing that jumped out at us was the ongoing, I don't want to say relationship, but the ongoing connection, you might say, between the cannabis world and the world of Georgia Strait. Over the years, the number of decades, some of the greatest covers and just thought-provoking covers have come up. And there's been some interesting stories. The subject of cannabis used to come up in almost all the early issues of the Georgia Strait. They had a column called The Bum Tripper's Guide, which offered commentary on the situation between Vancouver's marijuana fiends, as they were known, and the police who tried to bring them down. It was pretty heavy at times. There's some crazy ones. In 1969, the Strait thought it would be a good idea to publish an issue featuring a cannabis growing guide. Not surprisingly, the police stepped in. Publisher Dan McLeod and the managing editor Bob Cummings were both charged with counsel to commit an indictable offense for sharing growing tips with readers. Both were convicted but appealed and won their cases. Interesting over the years. And again, there's nothing new. The same conversations have been had for the last 50 years. It doesn't matter. Every time you look back at something, you go, hey, wasn't that something we were just discussing the other day? It's on and on. We talked earlier about big business getting involved in the cannabis world, and there's been a crazy frenzy in the stock prices over the last weekend, especially in Quebec. I'll just tell you about one company, Aurora Cannabis Inc. They've gone up more than 90% this month. That all happened, again, with speculation. It can secure a strong market share in Quebec. Quebec getting closer and closer, again, to finalizing its plans. BC, we're still waiting. We're supposed to hear something by the end of the year. We'll see how things go. Remember, they had the 1-800 line set up. People across the province were allowed to put in thoughts. Some provinces have already decided. We've heard Ontario's gone liquor control board. It looks like Quebec is going to go liquor control board as well. And I heard someone say there was only going to be 20 stores in the entire province of Quebec. 20 stores. That does not make sense at all. I know we talked earlier about, I think it was Newfoundland, was also going to have like 8 stores. But again, that's Newfoundland. This is Quebec, 20 possible stores. Ontario, as we know, has already gone that way. Manitoba has talked about having a kind of a hybrid between the private sector and government, and you kind of get the sense that that's probably going to be the way BC goes too. Hard to say though, but that seems to be the way things are going. Shoppers Drug Mart, how's this for you? If you ever go to those job boards, and I have in the past, there's one out there right now that might spark your interest. Shoppers Drug Mart is looking to hire a medical marijuana brand manager as it tries to position itself in the cannabis market, even though it's not currently legal to distribute the drug through pharmacies. This comes after Shoppers' parent company, you might have heard of them, Loblaws, applied for a Health Canada license to dispense medical marijuana in October of 2016. Again, big business. A number of the tobacco companies, a number of the distilleries and different booze makers, they're all getting involved in this. Everyone's investing in whether it's the growers, whether it's dispensaries, whether it's the technology. It is ever growing, and the numbers don't seem to be slowing down. This story, though, drives me crazy today. This is what makes me mad, and we've heard about this from people. Jody Emery talked about this. Don Briere, Carol Gwilt talked about this. Former police chief Julian Fantino is now, let's see, what's his new title? He is the executive chair of the Medical Marijuana Company. And you know who the president is? That's a former RCMP officer. These guys have now had a total change of heart. I don't want to be too cynical, but I'm going to say that as soon as they were approached with a huge check to head up the companies that were starting to sell marijuana or grow marijuana, they changed their tune completely. And this is what drives me crazy. Here's Fantino. He said he embarked on a fact-finding mission to learn more about medical marijuana after serving as a Minister of Veteran Affairs in the Harper government. He heard from veterans who he cares deeply for about how much marijuana helped them cope with injuries. You weren't interested in a fact-finding mission when you wore a badge? Like, what was the problem exactly? You want to know what? This is some of the stuff he said, and not too long ago about marijuana. This after the Prime Minister made his announcement about legalizing. Today, Justin Trudeau admitted that his top and urgent justice priority is to change the law to allow the sale of marijuana in corner stores, putting our children at risk. We heard the Prime Minister say that was not what he wanted to do, by the way. More fear-mongering. Justin's singular justice policy will make smoking marijuana a normal everyday activity for Canadians, and he wants to make marijuana available in storefront dispensaries and corner stores, just like alcohol and cigarettes. This is simply wrong and puts the health and safety of our children and communities at risk. Now he's getting a check from a medical marijuana company, and I saw the light. You know what? There are some positives to this. It's hypocrisy at its best, and he's not the only one. You see that time and time again. Those that were leading the fight to keep marijuana illegal and prohibition in place are now the people that are probably going to benefit the most from legalization, and it does make you kind of, well, a little sick to your stomach. Our next guest on the show, Dr. Rob O'Brien, President Director of Valens AgriTech, as well as SUPRA THC Services. Doctor joins us on the couch. Thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Before we get into, there's so many things, but I mentioned off the top of the show, I found this fascinating. I wanted to get your take on this. We talked briefly before we came on air about the roadside tests. This is something we hear over and over again. You guys are involved in research and development. Is there a roadside test? Does there need to be a roadside test? Because that seems to be top of the list for people that are concerned about what's going to happen.
So a lot of this is really, there's a bit of a red herring here. People shouldn't be driving and smoking, absolutely, that's for sure. There's no doubt about that. But with the roadside tests, so my background, I'm an analytical chemist, we measure things. And the tests that they'll have on the roadside will not be accurate enough. And the truth is, when they raise fear, there's no test for cannabis. There's also no test for fentanyl, there's no test for cocaine. There's no test for speed. There's a lot of these drugs that are a problem.
It's an eye test, really, for the police when they pull you over.
A better approach would be, let's just put in the back of a police car a virtual reality headset and see if people are capable of driving. Now, in terms of the saliva test, that's going to happen.
Yes, I've heard about it. I think in Australia they talked about
well,
saliva
it's happened in Canada, too. But we don't know the correlation between the measured concentration and whether that leads to intoxication, right? And another issue is some medical patients who are using this daily, they'll have a background level that is probably higher than what the legal limit is, and they're functioning fine. So it has to be related to the function.
Well, I'd make the argument there's probably people been driving under the influence of marijuana for the last 50 years.
Well, and let's look at, to take a little bit of the fear away. If you look at the states where they've legalized, a couple of things have happened. One is that the deaths from driving have reduced significantly. And my belief is that when there's a choice between, let's face it, a lot of young people, they go out on the weekend with the objective of getting intoxicated. It's not wise, but they do.
Right.
If they have a choice between cannabis and alcohol, if they use cannabis, they're less violent, so violent crimes reduce significantly. They drive slower, so the number of deadly deaths on the highway goes down significantly. And the other thing that we don't quite understand is that opioid overdoses have decreased 25%.
That's an interesting, I want to get into that.
Yeah, sure.
For sure. But we did, a number of weeks ago on the show, we heard from the, I think it was the Colorado Medical Officer of Health, who said that, some of the things that we were all worried about, none of that happen. Their biggest concerns were dealing with the demand and changing the rules so you could have more with you. Let's talk about the opioids. So long we've been given the information and misinformation that marijuana was a gateway drug. Constantly we were told that. Now we're hearing from people, you know what, it's an exit drug. Or the idea that you could be using medical cannabis instead of being on the opioids in the first place.
So we've actually partnered with the local pain intervention clinic. It's now called Bill Nelms Pain Intervention Clinic. Because one of the things they found is that people that have chronic pain, there's actually a belief that their endocannabinoid system is getting disrupted, and there's inflammation that is leading to this. And they find that the cannabinoid, particularly high T CBD products, can get them off opioids. Now, when we think about this use, I think this pain reduction is a big part of it. So there's a lot of people, particularly as they get older, they get more pains, more chronic pains. And the solutions that physicians have been dealing out before are opioids or even over-the-counter prescriptions, right? Over-the-counter drug like Tylenol and this type of thing, all of which are bad for you. It seems that if you're using particularly high CBD cannabis, you can get off of these things. So there's people whose lives have been disrupted because they have chronic pain. And if they start using cannabis products, they can get off the opioids. Now, not only does that help them, but it also means that those opioids are not in their medicine cabinet, right? And so the kids don't get access to this. So there's getting prescription drugs on the street is a big issue. So, nobody's overdosed from cannabis use. So it's a harm reduction thing as well. And I think really the demographic, when people think about legalization, they think about that hippie, Bob Marley type thing. But I think there's also a lot of people who, as they're getting older, they're getting little pains in their quote unquote joints, right?
Yes.
So, they're reaching for these over-the-counter drugs. And honestly, kids die every year from Tylenol overdose. And
with what's going on now, I'd be scared to take the over-the-counter drugs, the stuff that's prescribed.
Well, it's not even over. So the thing is that Advil, they were a solution to a problem where people have chronic pain. I think in the future, once we get legalization, that there will be more reasonable solutions with cannabis-based products, oils and et cetera.
Let's talk a little bit about what you guys do.
Yeah.
You talk about research. What sort of stuff are you looking at?
We're doing a lot, right? So we have a couple of operating companies under the publicly traded Shell, Valens GroWorks, VGW, and the CSE is a little plug there. Right? We have Valens AgriTech, and we do R&D cultivation, but we're also setting up to do toll processing, where we'll produce oils that we sell back to LPs.
So the LPs sell you the...
We sell the feedstock,
right.
Typically from trim or that. We can make it into an oil and then resell it back. And we're really kind of looking at pushing the oil a little bit because as a scientist, I see no adverse health effect with an oil product. So that's one of the things we're doing as well. We've also applied for an LP, and we hope to get that by April. But we also have a lab, SUPRA THC Services. We do testing for ACMPR and LPs as well, to make sure there's no pesticides and these types of contaminants.
Because we hear that a lot, though, from different people in different parts of the industry that, some stuff is, they check it. They go, look, this has fungus, this has this has that.
Well, even more than that, we have some IP around traceability. So we can tell if a product, which grow room it's been in, complete fingerprinting. So we can trace it from seed right through to final product. And if the objective of the government is to be able to determine what's been grown illicitly versus legally, we can do that fingerprinting for them and distinguish those two products. Because you think in the future, right? So if you were an illicit person trying to sell this thing, it's easier to take your product that you grow in your backyard, put it into something with a label of Tilray or somebody on it, right?
Right.
If that ends up in a schoolyard, how does that company prove that it's not their product? Well, we have fingerprinting, like the CSI fingerprinting stuff, we do that, right?
It's hard to imagine there's going to be a huge black market still.
Well,
I can see where there still would be some for sure.
Well, again, at the end of Prohibition, let's talk about alcohol. How many bootleggers do you really know?
Right.
How many people grow tobacco in their backyard? How many people have stills in their garages? These are all things you're allowed to do. And the truth is, people, they take the path of least resistance. I'm not going to say they're lazy, but perhaps they are. But they take the path of least resistance. And if it's available in a reasonable thing, and they know it's safe too. That's the other thing, right? When you go and buy products like wine, you know it's been tested. So that's why you don't go to a bootlegger, because you're worried it's,
Right.
you're going to get
Gasoline.
or gasoline or methanol or something,
Right.
and you're going to go blind, right? So it's the same thing. So if we produce this properly and make sure it's safe, it's a do no harm thing as a scientist as well.
Let me ask you this, because this isn't a medical or scientific question, but we saw Ontario's going the liquor control board route. Quebec seems to be going the same way. Manitoba looks like they're going to have a hybrid. I kind of get the sense that's what would happen. Do you have a preference? Do you see it working one way or the other?
Well, one of the things I say is they don't ask me to make the rules. My job is to exploit them to the best of my ability.
Right.
So, the thing is that they're going to determine what the rules are. We're going to stay inside the bounds of those, and we're going to produce the highest quality, safest products possible. And try to then develop the science around this so that we know how this works. So in the past, maybe some of the LPs, they were really invested into having this have medical use, right? With us, we can now do that science completely honestly and say what it works for and what it doesn't. But one of the things we know it works for is chronic pain issues, because the symptoms, when the symptoms are relieved and somebody says, I can live about my life and I couldn't before,
right?
There's no doubt there, right?
Right.
So.
No, well, that's it. So would it be clinical trials? Would that be the kind of thing you do?
Yeah, so, and the other thing with clinical, so we're not focused on that, because think about how difficult it is to do a clinical trial. So traditionally what you do is you have a control group that don't use your medicine, and you have a test group that you test. Now, what other drugs can the control group and the test group both be using this product on the side, right? They just go get their little medicine on the side.
Yeah.
So it's a unique thing there. And the other thing that when I give talks to groups, one of the funny things I do is I ask, okay, who in this group smoked drugs in the last 2 months? Nobody puts their hands up, right? You're talking to an audience of 100 people. They lie like rugs. So when physicians, when they start to get the history, people tend to lie about drug use. They tend to lie about sexual history. There's things that they're uncomfortable with. So the other thing that we're looking at doing is doing hair tests, blood tests, to find out what there's really in their system. It's an area called molecular epidemiology. And the other thing is very difficult to control the dose. So if you smoke a product and you draw that in, it's very heterogeneous, so it's hard to know how much you're actually getting in.
Right.
And there's even a difference that if you draw this into your lungs versus you bring it into your mouth and blow it out your nose, the pharmacology of it is different.
Really?
And it's something, until you start to think about it, you just don't think about it. And let's say oil as well. You say, well, okay, I'll standardize it, I'll put it in oil. Well, if you swallow that product, what happens is it goes through your GI tract through a first pass metabolism, and you end up producing metabolites that have different strengths than some of the THC and CBD would have. But if you put that in an oil under your tongue, the pharmacology is different. The onset's a little bit quicker, and it doesn't go through the first pass metabolism. So one of the big problems is the prohibition on cannabis has also been a prohibition on the science and scientists and science of cannabis. So now that we're getting off that, we're getting more mainstream scientists coming into the fold. And with them, we're going to be able to get more insights on what the truth is here.
Do we have, I think Camille's got a question for us. Sure. It's amazing. It's the same product, same break, just affects you differently. Or the way, depending on how you ingest it.
Yeah, and it's how effective it gets into your system.
Right. Thank you, Camille. That's interesting. Here's a question, just because this is, I guess, in your neck of the woods. This is from Susie and Nelson. How is the city of Kelowna embracing the medical marijuana business? She says she's heard about raids. What is this?
They're perplexed, honestly. They're trying to figure it out.
Like everybody, it seems.
Yeah, and the province hasn't told us how it's going to be distributed. And right now, we had the mayor out recently to our facility, and we've done our facility at a very high level, and they're kind of using that as a standard. But one of the things with them is with the taxes, they're looking at the province and the federal government sharing those, whereas the municipalities are the front line. They should have, a third of the taxes, but they're only given about 8%. So they're going to say, how are we going to deal with this delivery system properly? And so they're trying to get their head around that, but they can't even start until the province tells them how they're going to, how the distribution is. Right?
My pet peeve, well, not even my pet peeve, my mantra is they have to earmark the tax dollars from the sale of marijuana for specific projects.
Sure.
So people who don't even use it see where it's going and go, okay, you know what, it's been legalized, but look, they just paid for that brand new school, or they just paid for whatever it may be. You can't put it in general revenue. I think that would be the biggest mistake the government could make.
Again, you know, I'm not asked how to make the rules, but honestly, even
you just try to exploit them.
Well,
no, using your word, it's all good.
But even with this tax on the medical versus non-medical, and people get all upset with that type of thing, but it's the way the system is. And perhaps maybe the LPs, maybe they should eat those costs and make sure the medical people have it at as low cost as possible.
You know what, there's going to be so much money out there.
Yeah,
you would think
the recreational market is
going
to be so massive that will be enough to pay for these other things.
Here, just one final thing, a comment from Michael Hare. He says, even if you are using recreationally, you are treating yourself medically. You're just unaware of the healing cannabis is providing, so the distinction isn't necessary. Is there, again, I've heard people say, no matter when you're using it, it's medicinal. Whether it's stress release, whether it's your appetite, whatever it may be, it's always medicinal. There's no such thing as not medicinal.
Yeah, so when you go and buy Tylenol, you don't need a prescription to buy Tylenol.
Yeah.
But you're using that as a self-treatment. When you buy a natural health product, you don't need a prescription for that. So this is a self-treatment thing. And so when you actually eat spinach, this is a functional food, it's a health product.
Right.
It has an impact on your health. So all of these things do. In terms of cannabis products...
Should it be a natural health product? Should cannabis be a natural health product?
By definition, it would be. I think people at Health Canada that are running the natural health product thing would not want to have to deal with that. And when we get to edibles, it's a functional food.
Right.
The ironic thing is that when we legalize, I'm thinking it's probably going to be June instead of July 1st, the oils are an edible, right? So there's going to be a whole bunch of just add cannabis products that come out of the oils, right? And we've actually focused a bit on oils because we have a process to produce 100% cannabis oil, and we don't use extractions and solvents in that, and I think that's a niche that we're pushing with our company, 100% cannabis oil. So. But I think these oils are going to have lots of uses as a just add cannabis into products. So people are going to use these as food products. But even with that, I'm personally against using them in candies or desserts. At the end of the day, why would you put an appetite enhancer in your dessert? Right? Does that make sense to you? It doesn't make sense to me.
Sure.
Why don't we put it in the appetizer? Imagine you go to a fine restaurant 2 years from now, and the appetizer has a little cannabis in it. And so the food tastes a little bit better. And you get more dessert, you review the restaurants better. These are all positive things, right? And the science behind that's fascinating. Why does music sound better? Why is your appetite enhanced? And it's not about getting intoxicated for most people, I think, going forward.
Right.
Most people have a glass of wine with dinner. They'll have a little bit of this when it's there, right? And the same thing with red wine. There's a lot of people I know, it's for the health effects. Yeah, right.
Sure.
They'll be using cannabis for the health effects as well, the same way they do with the red wine.
It just makes you feel better about it.
It makes you feel better, right? And what's wrong with that?
Doctor, thanks so much for coming in. We really appreciate it. Dr. Rob O'Brien, Valens AgriTech and SUPRA THC Services, the president and director. Thanks so much for coming in. Our thanks also to, of course, Mark Frogley and Tim Doling from the Sunshine Ridge Baptist Church. Thanks to all of you for spending some of your Thursday with us. This has been THC Live. We'll see you all and do it all over again next week.